From Barangaroo Studios, the ausbiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Welcome to the COB on this Monday afternoon. A pleasure to be here with you on the 4th of November. I'm Nadine Blaney, and I'm joined today by Josh Gilbert, who is from eToro. Before we get to Josh, though, I'll just get you up to date on what we're watching as the market shuts down for this, the first day of trade, in what will be, no matter which way you slice or dice it, or whoever wins the U.S. election, is a big week. Today, snapping a three-day losing streak with the COB Australia Index up by 0.7%. Last time I checked, 9 out of 10 sectors well into positive territory, and we've got some key themes that we're keeping our eye on today. Well, I'll start with the market momentum because, as I mentioned, looking pretty good, and though we're likely in for a bout of volatility this week as we continue to watch the Trump trade and trepidation around that, everyone I spoke with today, and I spoke with some great people. I spoke with Junbei Liu, for example, from Tribeca Investment Partner. She just reckons that this market is looking good, that you want to be invested. She points to interest rates. They are going down. We'll hear from the RBA tomorrow. Interest rates will not be cut here locally tomorrow, but still, that is where rates are headed. And we get to hear from the FOMC this week as well. Now, one of the biggest corporate stories today, but really, one of the biggest ones I'd say it will end up being this year is MinRes. Worst performer today. Its founder, its managing director will be stepping down. Now, the questions are, is it happening fast enough? He'll be gone between 12 and 18 months, as will the chair of the board. Got the backing of some of the big shareholders, L1 Capital being one of them, but some raising the question whether or not it should happen quicker. Whatever the reason, Junbei Liu, just to reference that, for example, she said that, look, we'll be lacking founder flair when it comes to mineral resources, and she reckons that's pretty difficult to replace. But bad behavior does get punished these days. All right, let's get to our sectors of the day very quickly. Tech names, WiseTech. Well, Technology One hit a record high today, finished the session up by 2.3%. Bit of news from NextDC, which I'll get to in just a moment as well. Telcos were looking pretty good. Telstra putting on 1.4%. Spark New Zealand up by 2.6%. The retailers, the discretionary retailers, as a whole, were looking good as well. A bit of selling you can see there in JB Hi-Fi and Premier Investments. The miners, the big miners, all coming under pressure. Rio, Fortescue, but yeah, it's that mineral resources at the bottom of your screen that really did take the cake today, with the managing director, as I mentioned, to leave after that probe into tax evasion. Westpac, its annual profit was down as costs overshadowed a little bit of a bump in net interest margins. It did increase its final dividend and extend a share buyback, and its shares were up by about 1%. There's NextDC again. It jumped on the refinancing of its existing debt facilities, $1.9 billion worth, so getting more favorable terms there. Spartan Resources, it actually featured on the call today, and it says that it's made an agreement to sell its Glenburn and Edgerton projects to Benz. And then I thought Firefly, interesting that it's in the news. It too was on today's edition of the call, and it has signed an agreement to acquire the Tilt Cove copper gold exploration project. Westgold Resources, though, not on the list, but it did win the day on the 200. And it was, just talking about an update coming from one of its projects there. And Westgold shares were up by 3.5%. Retail Food Group has acquired COB Espresso. Santos has completed a 2.6% stake sale in PNG LNG to Kumul Petroleum. And as I mentioned, Technology One hit a record high. But let's get some analysis on our stock of the day. Mineral Resources, Nathan Somasundaram from Deep Data Analytics, and Kai Chen from MPC Markets.
Look, you got to think long term. In the short term, this is going to suffer. You're not going to make much money. It probably will go south. Probably short to medium term, it's going to be negative. Medium to long term, I think it's positive. I do like him. He does have a play, and they're in the right areas. I mean, we're not going, we're not seeing iron ore going to $200, but it still make good money, and the market will get pessimistic.
Okay, so is it good value today, or are you still not going to be buying it because it still is in that downgrade cycle?
It's in a downgrade cycle, management issues. It'll hurt them in the short term. Sit back and wait. If once it goes probably close to $30 or lower, you start buying a bit at a time.
There's probably a bit of a grey area where he's willing to operate, so who knows what else is underneath. But I think, obviously he's still going to be fairly involved with the company. I think it just needs a bit of time to settle through this whole period and get back to actually valuing what the business is about.
Okay, so if you already owned it, would you hold it?
Yes.
So we've got the corporate news out of the way, the sectors out of the way, stock of the day, and that leaves us with Josh Gilbert to put things in perspective for us. Joining us from eToro. Josh, pretty good way to start the week, I reckon.
Absolutely, yeah, great to be here, Nadine. Thanks for having me. Look, I think it's always, especially when we have such a big week ahead, to start in the green. Up nearly, close to 1% is a pretty good start to the week. Obviously, a good tailwind from the US on Friday, leading us higher. Market sort of really looking past that sort of weaker than expected jobs report. Only materials and energy sort of dragging us down today. Obviously, you went through it there with MinRes sort of really being that drag on the materials sector. Utilities and tech driving higher. A great start to the week after what is going to be a pretty big week ahead for a lot of investors.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, you pick. Where do we start? RBA, Fed, election. And as I was saying to Andrew this morning, I think on Thursday, there are still 1,400, just that one day, companies that are due to report in the US. I mean, we're just getting a lot of information coming our way.
Yeah, and like you say, it is a massive week to sort of navigate. Obviously, clearly we're going to see volatility pick up this week. And I think, as you say, we're really going to probably narrow in on that US election, that Fed decision, the RBA decision. But as you say, we've got US and Australian companies still sort of reporting with AGM season sort of flying through as well. And I think, look, volatility is going to pick up, but great time for investors to sort of remember, if you need to turn that screen off, to put that phone down, try not to sort of panic whatever we see. Markets are going to move quite a lot this week. If we look at sort of the volatility that's implied from markets, we are going to see some big swings. Stick to that long-term investing plan. But look, I think really for me, the real key focus is, if we look outside the US election, is probably going to be that Fed decision. Yeah. We've had a bit of a change in data over the last sort of week or so. That GDP number coming in pretty strong, PCE picking up the most since April, and then obviously that jobs number being weak, but obviously on the effect of those Boeing layoffs and obviously the hurricane as well. So, markets are still convinced we're going to get that 25 basis point cut, and markets are still very convinced that we're going to get another 25 basis point cut in December as well. Look, bottom line, the US appears in our view to be in a pretty solid footing. The jobs market, the economy and earnings, all in a good place in our view. And I think until that changes, the long-term driver of this bull market remains intact. And I think we'll keep seeing stocks move higher until year end. The only way that we really see that maybe being knocked a little bit this week is obviously if we maybe get a slightly more hawkish Jerome Powell coming through. He'll reiterate, of course, that that they're going to be sort of, again, focused on that data. They're not on that sort of preset course. But as I say, we still see 25 basis point cut later in the week, which is pretty obvious. And that December meeting, we still see a cut as well.
Yeah, it would just be such a loss of faith to deliver a 50 basis point cut and follow it up with, nothing. So 25 basis points baked in. We'll look into the rhetoric. Also with the RBA, I mean, do you think that what we can expect from the RBA at most tomorrow is to communicate a more neutral stance? Is that the likely, piece that we're looking for?
I think it's a difficult one. And look, most economists, and if we look at what the market is saying, really in terms of analysts, etc., we're looking to February. But market pricing doesn't actually have that cut in place until May. So there is a bit of a detachment there, really, from markets and what sort of economists are thinking. So it'll be really interesting tomorrow to see if Michelle Bullock keeps up that hawkish stance, if we maybe do see her move slightly more neutral, if commentary does change slightly, will we see markets sort of move closer to where we sort of see, most economists and analysts sort of putting their thinking? Will that sort of gap widen? Will it come closer? That's going to be really interesting to see. I think that inflation number that we had last week sort of reiterated probably the reason why we've seen Michelle Bullock sort of keep her foot on the gas a little bit, continue to sort of take that hawkish approach, not really pull away from that at any point. Of course, we know that her predecessor made obviously a few mistakes in terms of giving that forward guidance, as we know. So we obviously probably not going to get anything along those lines. But again, we only have a couple more meetings left until we get to February. So it'll be really interesting to see if that commentary does change. I personally don't think we'll sort of see her move neutral. I think she'll stay towards sort of staying a little bit hawkish, and I think that's why markets are sort of pricing in May. But I think that February is probably the right call for now.
Okay. So I think what you said earlier is actually quite important for many people, that it's okay to not be involved when there's so many risk events, particularly around the US election. But if you look at what the flow is on the platform, Josh, are people into the gold trade right now? Is that coming at the expense of something else? Tech today here locally did quite well, but that was a bit touch and go around some of those big tech earnings in the United States. So what's moving?
Yeah, look, obviously last week, the Magnificent Seven really sort of took most people's interest, and sort of for a moment there sort of maybe put aside what we were sort of getting this week in terms of US elections. It was a huge week for tech in that sense. Mixed, but I think bottom line, a lot of those, came down to the really fine details. If we look at their performance this year, again, you have to sort of be very much perfect. And unfortunately, for the likes of Meta and Microsoft, great results really across the board, maybe just letting themselves down in terms of, commentary going into next quarter. Apple, I think, is probably the standout in terms of, real weakness there, not delivering in China, not delivering on those iPhone sales. For me, it's really coming down to Apple Intelligence. It's a bit of a staggered rollout on that sort of AI move. Clearly, they're not firing on all cylinders at the moment. And I think when we do get to see a bigger rollout of Apple Intelligence later in the year, they're going to be sort of introducing ChatGPT into its sort of devices. I think that will be a catalyst to sort of help drive sales and ultimately this upgrade cycle a little bit further as well. So I think, again, that story doesn't really change for Apple in our view. And then on the other side of that, you had Alphabet and Amazon obviously delivering great numbers, great cloud growth from Alphabet and Amazon, obviously giving good guidance for, obviously what is their most important time of the year. In terms of what we're seeing last week, we obviously saw a big move into Bitcoin, particularly given that we've closed in on a record high. That was very much that sort of Trump trade. Trump was obviously really dominating the betting markets last week. It was almost 65% when I looked on Friday. That's sort of narrowed a lot more this week and over the weekend, and now we're being sort of seeing it called as one of the closest elections potentially ever. So that's going to be really interesting. We might see some of those Trump trades unwind a little bit, and I certainly think this week we'll see some of those flows move into some of those risk-off assets like gold, as you mentioned there, just as investors sort of really try to sort of navigate this week. And I think the biggest thing here, I think, for a lot of our investors is actually the biggest risk is just this election just moving past. And I think once we get past that and we can just sort of understand where we are, I think investors will feel a little bit more comfortable and they can focus back on the fundamentals, because that is really key. Fundamentals drive markets a lot more than what politics do.
Certainly they do. All right. The obsession continues until we get past Wednesday, though. Josh, nice to see you to start the week. As always, have a good one.
Thank you, Nadine. Have a great week.
Joining us from eToro. All right, let's take a look at some of these leaders and laggards. And I mentioned Strike Energy out with an update as well when it comes to how the positioning in that Perth Basin with Hancock and MinRes will impact it. It's up by 8%. Telix Pharmaceuticals reckons that they are in for perhaps a better payments regime in the United States after the CMS decision to improve payments for diagnostic radiopharmaceuticals, up by 3.4%. No news with Tabcorp Car Group, but either, or WiseTech Global, but tech, as I mentioned, one of the best performing sectors there. They were all up by 3% plus apiece. Flip side to that, though, MinRes down by close to 10%. We've had downgrades coming through after the new manager, or after the managing director will have to leave. He's going to have to pay penalties amid this tax and conduct probe. And yeah, we did have Citi, for one, downgrading MinRes. And we've got Star Entertainment, Boss Energy, Bellevue, and Deep Yellow all losing ground today. Now, some of the small cap leaders coming through in the resources space, as you can see, Red Hawk Mining up by close to 21%. Flip side to that, though, is Mika Metals, which was down by 19%. EZZ Life Sciences off by 14%, and Biome Australia down by 13%. And yeah, that's a pretty punchy fall for Biome. Globe International as well, down by 10%. Did have a good chat with Matthew Kidman, who is joining us from Centennial Asset Management. It's not online yet. I'll get it up there shortly. But yeah, seeing a lot of promise in the small end of the market. Tonight, Eurozone October manufacturing PMI. We get U.S. September factory orders. We also get some earnings again in the United States. No big headliners, as you can see on the screen there. And if you are watching tomorrow, watch out for that RBA meeting. Monetary policy decision gets handed down at 2:30. It's also the statement of monetary policy. Then at 3:30, we will hear from the Governor, Michelle Bullock, media conference. And actually, Victoria's on a holiday. We also get inflation from, PMI coming through from China. So plenty to keep us occupied tomorrow. Here is a final look at where this market finished. We did see the CBO Australia Index ending up by 0.7%. So similar gains being posted for the S&P ASX 200. It finished up by about 0.6%, 8,164. That does it for the day here live. However, we've got a treat for you. The investment committee will be playing out shortly after this if you're watching us on ausbiz.com.au, or you can go to ausbiz.com.au to watch the November edition of the investment committee. It's there shortly.